I now invite Ms. Nancy Secrest to speak about the Theosophical Society and her involvement therein.
Good afternoon. I would like to thank I would like to thank Sankara for inviting us, and Prema and Gayatri as well. Thank you very much. I'm supposed to be talking about the TS and my involvement with it. The proem to the Secret Doctrine, if any of you are familiar with that, talks about three. I'm going to say conditions. It's not the right word, but I'm not thinking of the right word right now. But the third one says that all of us are on a journey. It's the pilgrimage through many lives, that gets us to the point of knowing ourselves, our spiritual selves, and attaining to oneness with all. You don't know me. You could probably care less about my specific journey. I'm going to tell you, I have never actually done this before. It's a very kind of thing that Theosophists do when they get together. They will ask, how did you find Theosophy? And each person will say, well, this was my first introduction. I did this, I did that. But other than that kind of thing, I have never, in a group before, gone through my own journey. And as I said, it in itself is of no importance. The thing to remember, the thing that we all need to know and do know, is that each of us has a journey, and this is just an example of one of them. Okay. Today is Guru Purnima. Am I saying that right? Guru Purnima, where we appreciate and thank and revere all of the teachers who have helped us along the way. And in reflecting on this, I realize that I have had many teachers. For one thing, in the Mahatma letters, which is one of the classical theosophical books, the master says, all men are your teachers, all people are your teachers. Some teach you what to do, and some teach you what not to do, which is kind of cool, really. So, but over and above that, there are certain individuals who we get to know, and whose words and actions affect us in our lives. And during my life, I have been privileged not so much to meet, because some of them I've met, some of them I haven't met, but I have been very much influenced by the various teachings. I was born in the United States. That's probably obvious. And I was born into a Roman Catholic family. My parents, my mother was Roman Catholic. My father was Protestant. You probably know that the Christian religion has two major sides. One is Catholic and one is Protestant. And then within the Protestant faith, there are many different religions: Lutheran, Presbyterian, Methodist, Baptist. And they all have their little idiosyncrasies which make them different from each other. And actually, according to Theosophy, well, they're all the same. And so is Hinduism and Jainism and Islam. The basis for all religions is the same. So I was raised Roman Catholic per my mother. When my parents married, my father never practiced his religion at all. So, and in my mother, it was a big deal for my mother to marry my father, because in doing so, she, unless he accepted the Catholic faith, she could not be married in church. And so in the eyes of the church, the marriage was not really valid, although legally and everything it of course was. So, and she also, after marrying him, could no longer take what are called the sacraments in church. And so that really was a big deal for her. But my father promised her that the children of the marriage would be raised Catholic. So, that made it okay for her. So I was raised Catholic. I was the oldest of 5 children. And I went to a public school. There are also private Catholic schools that children can go to. But I went to a public school, and we had, like, after school, 1 day a week, we would have catechism, which is like a Sunday school in other religions. And as a child, those are taught by nuns, and then once you get into high school, it's taught by a priest. So we would go to catechism. And many people in the Christian faith, especially those who are Protestant, see God as an old man with a long white beard sitting up in a throne in heaven watching over everything. I never had that concept at all in my mind. That picture was never there. And I think it's because in catechism, what they teach you when you're little is that they'll teach you certain prayers that everybody in that faith says. And also there's one verse that I always remember, and that is, God is a spirit. He had no beginning, and he will have no end. So to me, that just took away it never even came in there to begin with, that concept of an old man sitting up in heaven. So to this day, when somebody, especially somebody who says they are Christian, because a Catholic person will never say, I'm Christian. That's a Protestant thing. So when they say they're Christian and they'll ask you, do you believe in God? I kind of stop. And my tendency is to say, define God. What do you mean by God? Because to me, it is not a being sitting there somewhere. To me, it is more, it's energy. It's much more like what you read in the Vedas and all of that kind of thing. It's energy, it's spirit, it's something that runs through everything. Not a kind of a being who decides what we will and won't do, and to whom you pray. I pray sometimes, but not to something. Okay, so during this time, I'm living life as a child, and when I was about 12 years old, I started to question. And I kept thinking, I thought about the faith I was in, and I kept thinking, there's nothing wrong with it. Everything that it teaches is fine, but it doesn't go far enough. There's more. There's a lot more that they're not telling us. And when I got into high school, I started asking, and I told you that the priests teach the high school students. I started asking questions, and that made the priests very nervous because they couldn't answer. The thing was, have faith, have faith. And, there weren't the right answers. There was no answer. And they, got very, very nervous about if I had raised my hand or something about calling on me, because they didn't want to go through that. Okay. So I was 12 years old. And I thought, well, what do I do? How do I figure this out? And one day I went into my bedroom and I sat cross-legged on my bed. It was daytime, middle of the afternoon. I sat cross-legged on my bed and closed my eyes, and I said to myself, there is no God. And I sat there a few minutes, and I opened my eyes, and I was looking out the window, and there were the trees and the birds and the butterflies and the sky. And I said, well, that's ridiculous. And so I've just told you my definition of God. So I didn't mean, you know what I meant. So I said, okay, that's ridiculous. Now what? And I love to read. I was always an avid book reader. So I went to the library, and those of you who are familiar with the Dewey Decimal System, which is passé now it's Library of Congress in libraries, I started in the first section in the Dewey Decimal System is religion and philosophy. And so I started at one end of the books, and I just started reading. And I think about that now, and I was 12. Who does that at 12? But I started reading, so I read about Buddhism, and I read about Baha'i, and I read about Jainism, and I read about Zoroastrianism, all various religions of the world. Nothing clicked with what inside of myself I felt was the thing, was right, I guess, for lack of a better word. And then as I grew, in the meantime, I was going to school, and I had friends, and I would go with my friends to their churches and visit to see, what did they do, what's going on there. So I did all of that. One other thing that I did was I stood up. I told my parents I wanted to talk to them. So my mother and father are sitting there, and I'm standing in front of them. And at 12, I said, I don't believe in the Catholic Church. There's more to what than what they're teaching, and I want to quit. I want to go and do other things. My mother was beside herself. It was just, what? My father calmed her down first, and then he said to me something that I have always thought was so very wise. He said, Nancy, you're 12 years old. When I married your mother, I promised her the children would be raised in her faith. I will keep that promise. He said, but nobody can tell you what to think or what to feel inside. Nobody can do that. So I will just ask you to please go through the motions, do the things that are, within this religion, and then when you are 18, you are free to choose your own path. And I thought, I looked at my dad and I said, okay. Because even at 12, I could see the wisdom in that. And I thought that was really, really very significant. One of the things that never sat well with me in the Catholic faith is that there is such a thing as confession and absolution. And when I mentioned that my mother couldn't receive the sacraments any longer after she married my father, they did rectify that years later. He actually went and he took instruction, and they had their marriage blessed by the church, so she could do that later in their life. That was a very nice thing for him to do. But in the Mass that is said, one of the things the priest does is he blesses what's called a host. It's a little wafer, just a thin little wafer, and blesses that and wine, and then all the people come up and they all get a bit of this, and it's called the body and blood of Christ. It's a symbolism thing. But before you can do that, you have to go to confession. You have to be pure, free of sin. So you go to confession, and you go in this little booth, and the priest is in another booth next to you, and there's a little panel in between with like a netting, and you might see a silhouette of a face or something, but you can't see him, he can't see you. So unless you're an avid churchgoer and he knows you, he doesn't even know who he's talking to. So you have to go and you confess your sins, and like, as a child, well, I talked back to my mother 3 times, and I did this, and I did that, and I told a lie, and things like that. And then the priest will give you what they call penance, which is usually to say a few prayers. And then they will give you absolution. This is something that only a priest can do. And so they are absolving you of your sins to that point. By the way, before a child is 7 years old, they cannot sin. Just in case you didn't know that. They cannot sin, which it's probably true. So anyway, they would give absolution. And that always bothered me, because I thought, this is a man. How can he decide this? How can he do this? It never quite sat well with me. So that was one of the things. And so that's one of the things that Krishnamurti talks about, is authority over you. Okay. So life goes on. And I was going through this spiritual process, and at the same time, of course, there is ordinary life. And as Maria pointed out, that Krishnamurti has pointed out, you have to have organizations. You go to a job, you earn money, you make a living, you support your family, you take care of your family, you do all of these things, because it's a part of life. Thank you. Okay. Because it's all a part of life. But it isn't who you are, and it isn't where, your basic being. So life went on. I got married, I had a child, we got divorced, I raised that child by myself, and during that process, I went to college, and one day, I was working in a bank. One day on my lunch hour, I walked down the street to a bookshop. I was 21 at the time. And I walked into the bookshop, and this particular bookshop happened to be owned by a theosophist. And I had been studying all these different religions and metaphysics ever since I was 12, and this was a metaphysical bookshop. It was my kind of place. I liked it there. Ended up spending a lot of time there, because they had chairs and couches, and you could sit there and read, and nobody told you go away or buy something. It was a very nice place. So that first time I went in and I looked around, and I think I picked out a couple of books. And then when I went to pay, the person who was in charge, the owner, took my money and he put another little tiny book into my bag. And when I got home, I found it was At the Feet of the Master, the little book. I read that book. And it was the biggest aha moment ever in my life, because this was it. This was what I was looking for. So, interestingly enough, my introduction into theosophy was through Krishnamurti. So I learned that. Am I going over time? How am I doing? I'm okay. All right. After some time, And I usually went every weekend. I would go to this bookstore and spend some time there. And they were members of the Theosophical Society, and they had classes. So I started going to the classes for the Theosophical Society and joined the society then. And after some time, two things happened. One time, a group of us went to a program at the headquarters of the Theosophical Society in America. I lived in Detroit. That was in Chicago. It's about a 5-hour drive. So there were a group of us, and we drove down there. Walked into the building. Now, the lobby of the Theosophical Society in America is quite impressive. It's 2 stories, and it goes all the way up, around on 2 sides. 2 sides. On 2 sides, it's like this, just like this. It's perfect. It has a second floor, and then there is a balcony, a railing all around, which forms a balcony. So you can see all the way up, but it's 2 stories. And on one side, I looked up, and on the one side where there were offices, there was this bay window that jutted out. It was really cool looking to me. And I looked at that, and I thought, wouldn't it be great to work in that office? And you know what? A few years later, I did. After some time, I became the National Secretary of the Theosophical Society in America, and that was my office. So that was one thing. That was kind of cool. Also, and it was about 1982, 83, I went to Crotona, which is Maria had spoke about Crotona. It was in Ojai, California, and it's a center, Theosophical center there. And I was there for 2 weeks. She got to stay for 3 months. I was there for 2 weeks, right around the same time, but we never met each other then. And one of the things that was happening was that Krishnamurti was in town, and he used to give talks at the Oaks, which was the Krishnamurti school there. And so you could walk from the Theosophical Society grounds, not even out onto any street or anything, just through the woods, and you would get to the backside of the Oaks, which was where the talks were. And they left time every afternoon because they knew, the TS people knew, that everybody wanted to hear Krishnamurti. So they would leave time, and so we would all go to the talks. So I went 2 or 3 days, I went to Krishnamurti's talks. So I have been privileged to hear him speak in person. That was really nice. Before that time, I had read Krishnamurti's a couple of his books, and I could never quite get what he was talking about. It just didn't, make a lot of sense. But I sat there and I listened to him speaking in person. And after that, every time I picked up one of his books, I could hear his voice as I was reading it, and it made sense. Before that time, it hadn't. I don't know why that happened, but that was the case. So I worked for the TS in the United States, 2.5 years as National Secretary. I met my second husband there, got married, moved to Washington State. We were there for 27 years. In that time, I also became the International Treasurer of the Theosophical Society in America. You did not have to be on campus for that. That was more of a little bit of a figurehead position, but it was like an oversight position, not hands-on. So I did that. And then after 27 years, my husband and I were divorced. In the meantime, Tim, who I had met at the Theosophical Society in America, became the international president of the Theosophical Society here in Adyar. And one night I answered my phone, and it was Tim, and he said, "I need a treasurer. how do you feel about coming here and being a treasurer? And it was like, whoa, I have to think about that. So I did, and there was nothing keeping me in the States at all. And so I, called back and I answered, yes, I'll do that. So I went. Shortly after, a little while after I was in my position, he said to me one day, did you ever, in your wildest dreams, think you would be here, living here, working here? And of course the answer was no. It never, ever crossed my mind that I would ever be at Adyar. And actually, he told me it was the same for him. How did we get here? We didn't know. So, but the years since that time have been really great, and it's, as you all know, you probably, many of you have been to the grounds. They're beautiful, awe-inspiring. I was full of wonder at the butterflies and the birds and everything that was there. And it's been a very good experience, good life. I've gotten to know so many wonderful people, and a little bit about India. I've traveled some, but mostly to places to give talks for, so I haven't really gotten into the nitty-gritty of India, which is sad. But I have met a lot of people, and they're great. And I think I will close by reading from this book. And I think, and this is the purpose, and Maria talked about this too, and it is like the message that goes through all of Krishnamurti's talks, no hierarchy, no dogma, no, to have your own freedom. So this foreword in this book, which is As One Is, to free the mind from all conditioning, by Krishnamurti. To stand alone is to be uncorrupted, innocent, free of all tradition, of dogma, of opinion, of what another says, and so on. Such a mind does not seek because there is nothing to seek. Being free, such a mind is completely still, without a want, without movement. But this state is not to be achieved. It isn't a thing that you buy through discipline. It doesn't come into being by giving up sex or practicing a certain yoga. It comes into being only when there is understanding of the ways of the self, the me, which shows itself through the conscious mind in everyday activity and also in the unconscious. What matters is to understand for oneself, not through the direction of others, the total content of consciousness, which is conditioned, which is the result of society, of religion, of various impacts, impressions, memories. To understand all that conditioning and be free of it. But there is no how to be free. If you ask how to be free, you are not listening. So, thank you.